Well, on the show tonight, the Russia-Ukraine war is set to complete 500 days this week. While the pace of the war in terms of absolute territorial gains and losses has somewhat slowed down in the recent months, the stakes have gone up. At the moment, the war seems just one miscalculation away from burgeoning into a global nuclear catastrophe. We tell you all about that in the next 2 minutes.
Обстановка достаточно напряженная, потому что действительно велика угроза диверсий со стороны киевского режима. Диверсий, которые могут быть катастрофичны по своим последствиям. Киевский режим неоднократно продемонстрировал свою готовность не гнушаться ничем. Совсем недавно мы это видели.
Ситуація на Запорізькій атомній станції. Зараз увесь світ має бути свідомий того, що спільна безпека повністю залежить від глобальної уваги до дій окупантів на станції. Росія повинна чітко усвідомлювати, світ бачить, до яких сценаріїв готуються терористи. І світ готовий реагувати. Радіація – це загроза для всіх. Для всіх у світі і атомна станція повинна бути повністю.
Both Moscow and Kyiv have accused each other of plotting an attack on the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant situated in the southern Ukraine region. The nuclear power plant made headlines when Russia occupied the plant in March last year. Both sides have accused each other of shelling around the plant, dangerously raising the stakes in the war. But in recent days, the war itself has moved critically close to the plant, with fighting going on just kilometers away. In times like these, an alarm was raised first by the Russian side that Kyiv was planning an attack on the plant on the night of 5th of July. An advisor to the current Russian operators of the plant said Ukraine was planning to drop ammunition laced with nuclear waste on the plant using long-range precision equipment and the kamikaze drones. On the other hand, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in a late-night address accused Russia of plotting a false flag operation at the plant. He said Russia had installed objects similar to explosives on the plant, and if the explosives are detonated, they will not damage the power units, but it may create a picture of shelling from the Ukrainian side. None of the reactors at the plant produce electricity. Long aware of the risk, the UN's nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, has been trying for more than a year to get the plant demilitarized. The IAEA Director General has visited the plant 3 times since the Russian takeover, but has so far failed to reach any agreement to keep the facility safe from shelling. With the latest accusations and counter-accusations, the IAEA is seeking fresh access to the nuclear plant to assess the situation. So far, neither Russia nor Ukraine have provided any evidence of their assertions, so it all may end up to be nothing. But if things go south, the consequences would be unimaginable, not just for Russia or Ukraine, but for all of us, of course. Well, in a virtual interview to select journalists, the United States Ambassador to Ukraine, Bridget Brink, talked about the latest efforts on the war front in Ukraine and the economic impact of the war. She reasserted fears that the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant is under grave threat, which could have catastrophic consequences as well.
There is no doubt that Russia's occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant poses a grave threat to Ukraine and the world. Our view is that Russia should leave and deoccupy the plant so that the Ukrainians can continue to operate it. Recently, the Ukrainians have expressed very deep concern that Russia has mined areas in the plant and around the plant, and that what the Ukrainians claim that the Russians intend to set off explosives in the plant to potentially create a radiological catastrophe. It's very serious, and Russia has the ability to remove this threat immediately if it has its military and other forces leave the plant immediately.
And well, to the question from WION about America's expectations from India over the war in Ukraine, she said expectations was too strong a word, but the US spotted commonality on issues like nuclear safety, energy and food security. Listen in.
I think our maybe expectations is too strong of a word, but I think our hope in working with partners and allies around the world, including, of course, India and global leaders, especially leaders like India, is that we can find commonality in some of these basic principles that are so important to all of us, including this idea and principle of the territorial integrity of states.
And well, for more on this, we're now being joined by Dr. Leon Cizel from Budapest. He is the president of the European Nuclear Society. Dr. Cizel, thanks very much indeed for talking to WION this evening. How do you assess these counter-claims by Ukraine and Russia about the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant? What is the level of threat perception?
Good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation. From my perspective, the threats are possibly real. It's very difficult to assess what will happen and why people would damage the nuclear power plant. But the consequences of this action, whatever will happen, will most probably not be catastrophic. I would say that even in the worst case scenario, if there will be some leak of radioactive materials, this leak will be limited mostly to the site of the nuclear power plant, and will actually not be a threat to the wider Ukraine, and not for us, not for India, not for Europe in any case.
Right. Now, Ukraine is saying, Dr. Cizel, that power to the nuclear plant has been put off, especially in plant 3 and 4. What does that really mean? Does it suggest a false flag operation, as Ukraine is saying about Russia?
No, they have been losing the power connection to the grid to the Ukrainian side most of the time in the last 1 year, as the plant is under Russian occupation. It's let's say nuisance, but these things get restored if they don't have the connection to the electric grid. They go onto diesel generators. They are cooling the plant now without, I would say, major problems, especially because the plant is shut down for nearly 11 months now. So the amount of heat which needs to be removed for the plant is actually really small. A colleague of mine said it would be a garden hose, which will be enough water to get the heat out of the plant at this stage.
Mm-hmm. And Dr. Cizel, finally, what can the rest of the world do? We hear reports that, the Chinese president has also spoken to Putin and essentially said that, this is a no-go zone, talking about a nuclear escalation. It's also creating a certain amount of fear psychosis around the world. Is that the real attempt here, to create fear?
Yeah, that would be also, I would agree with this. It's an attempt to create fear. It is an attempt to create a kind of psychosis, so to say. And it's also a kind of attempt to get attention of, let's say, decision makers, because we are to some extent oversensitive to the nuclear power plants in the last decades. I would still be much happier myself if the military activities will not be performed around the nuclear power plant. But let me just say that the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant has been disabled for months or even years simply by destroying the dam just downstream of the river. So this plant cannot produce electricity until the dam and the water cooling will be restored, which is somewhere far in the future. And the major loss for Ukraine is that they lost about 10 gigawatts of the electric capacity for a few months or even years.
Right. Dr. Cizel, President of the European Nuclear Society, thanks very much indeed for joining us with your thoughts and perspectives on what is happening with the Zaporizhzhia Nuclear Power Plant. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.